Vande Mataram. Namaste Bharat. Today we have with us Mr. Kushal Morji. He is an advocate at Bombay High Court and he shall be delivering to us a presentation and knowledge on from investigation to trial, provisions under CRPC and practicalities. I now hand over him and request him to enlighten us with his knowledge.
Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction. First of all, a very big thank you to Mr. Murarka and his entire chamber, Devendra and Neeraj, who have been untiringly organizing webinars day after day. So a big thank you to them for organizing this. Today's topic, I am going to deal with procedure, because I know there are a lot of webinars going around and there's a deluge of webinars. So after much thought and some research, I found that there is a lot of material available on evidence as well as on the law. However, not much on procedure. And therefore, I've chosen this topic and I hope you guys find it helpful. You will appreciate that with the way things are going, at some point or the other, each one of you is going to be dealing with a criminal case in some form. And you must understand that at the end of the day, regardless of which under which law the prosecution is being conducted, the procedure will remain under CRPC, barring the exceptions that the special law may have. So therefore, it is very important to get a hang of the nitty-gritties of criminal procedure. The topic today, I'll just share my screen and I hope everybody can see that. The topic, if I may explain, the topic today is from investigation to trial. So basically the life cycle of a case, right from police investigation and registration of FIR till the trial, what all that entails, that is what I am going to try and cover. And also the practical tips, because as you know, in all of this, we deal with the police machinery. And I don't think I have to say much as to how the police machinery can behave. So therefore, it is also important to understand as to how to deal with the police and their secretive and other methods. Right. So this is the topic. What I'm going to try and cover today is briefly these 5 topics. How is a criminal prosecution launched? The investigation, once it is launched. Charge sheet, what is meant by charge sheet? A closure report, arrest and remand, and cognizance, committal, and trial. Coming to the first topic, how do you launch a criminal prosecution? So a criminal prosecution can be launched either by the state or can also be launched privately by you. Let us look at the first scenario, which is, I have called it the state case procedure. In a state case procedure, depending on the gravity of the crime, you have 2 kinds of cases. One is a cognizable case. Under a cognizable case, an FIR can be registered by the police officer under section 154. In case of a non-cognizable case, there is no FIR, and the police officer, in fact, cannot investigate without the permission of the magistrate. Let us see what are the differences. A cognizable case can arrest without warrant, can also take cognizance, basically registration of the FIR, and the offenses are punishable by 3 years or more. So this is the difference between a cognizable and non-cognizable. How do you know if your offense is cognizable or not? There is a schedule which is provided in the CRPC. That schedule basically contains composition of each offense as to whether it is cognizable, whether it is bailable, and it is triable by which court. Right? So there you may find as to the composition, even under each section, if you pick up the statute book, even under each section, the composition of every offense is provided. What is the law as regard to the FIR before we come to what actually happens? The law as mandated by a constitution bench judgment is that it is mandatory for the police officer to register an FIR if your complaint discloses a cognizable offense. So Supreme Court basically said that then the police officer does not have any choice but has to mandatorily register an FIR, except for in cases such as matrimonial disputes or economic offenses, where the officer may conduct something called a preliminary inquiry for say 7 days, and thereafter he must either register or give an opinion stating that no case is made out for registration of the FIR. This is the mandate of the law. Unfortunately, what happens when you go to the police station? When you go to the police station, please understand a few things. The police is already overworked, overburdened, and the registration of an FIR involves a considerable amount of work, which the police may or may not be willing to do. So therefore, when you go to the police station, three things may happen. One, that you get a really good officer and he may actually register your case. But more likely than not, either the police will try and register the NC, non-cognizable offense, because NC does not involve any work for them. NC has to be written down in the register called the NC register. A copy of that NC is given to you, and thereafter there is nothing more for the police officer to do. So most often when you really press for it, the officer will try and convince you that, okay, your case does not call for an FIR, but I will do you a favor and I will register an NC. That is to be avoided. Third, you may not even be that lucky and the officer may not even register an NC and you may come back empty-handed. So these are the three scenarios that may happen when you go to a police station and try and register. Another reason the police might try to tell you is that the police station does not have jurisdiction. However, the CRPC does not talk about jurisdiction, and you may approach any police station, and if your complaint makes out a case for cognizable offense, then the police is bound to register that. Practically, what they do is they register something called as a zero FIR, which is they take the complaint and they register the FIR, and then they transfer the zero FIR to the police station where the offense has occurred. So this is legally possible, but very difficult to have it implemented in the police station. Then another thing is, how do you actually get an FIR registered? What we do is we draft the complaint in writing and we submit it at the police station and get an acknowledged copy. Once you have done that, that complaint is then marked to an investigating officer or an IO, and the IO takes up the case and may or may not conduct the preliminary inquiry and thereafter give its opinion. One of them could be that no criminality is made out in your case, and he will close the case and he will send you a report in writing stating that you may approach the civil court for reliefs. However, we cannot take up this case. So these are the ways. So what do you do in case the police officer refuses to register your FIR? What are your options? One is under section 154(3), and I'll read out. It says, any person aggrieved by refusal on part of the officer in charge to record the information referred to in subsection 1 may send the substance of such information in writing and by post to the superintendent of police. In Bombay, it would be the concerned DCP, a Deputy Commissioner of Police, and who, if satisfied such information, discloses the commission, shall either investigate or direct somebody to investigate. So therefore, once you have approached the police station and they refuse to register FIR, you are required to write to the superior officer and inform him of the same, and he may address your grievance. What if even that does not work? Then you have something called section 156(3), wherein you approach the magistrate court and tell before the magistrate court that this is what I have done. These are the steps taken by me. This is my complaint. I made the complaint to the police station. Thereafter, I made the complaint to the DCP. However, still the police have refused to register my FIR. So kindly direct the police to register my FIR. Magistrate only has to see if your complaint makes out a cognizable case. If your complaint does make out a cognizable case, then the magistrate will direct the police to register an FIR. So we are back to the stage 1, where a police may directly register an FIR. Now, when that does not happen, you go through this route and the court directs the police to register an FIR. You may use 156.3 in another scenario, where you have documents to prove that there is commission of an offense. However, the conspiracy is much larger. So you may again tell the court that here I do have some documents. However, this crime appears to be much larger in nature, which I as a private complainant cannot possibly investigate into. And therefore, kindly direct the police to investigate into this matter, because it requires the expertise of the police machinery to bring the truth forward, right? So these are the two options before you. You approach the police station, does not work. You approach the higher officer, does not work. Then finally you approach the court. It is also necessary that when you approach the court, that you have to show that you have made all these attempts, that you have gone to police station and you have approached the superior officer. Only then will the court entertain your application for a direction to the police. So this is the state case procedure, wherein a prosecution is launched. Important to remember that once the state registers an FIR, it is the state which will investigate, it is the state which will prosecute, and you, though may have initiated the case, you are merely the first informant, and it is the state which is the prosecuting agency. Now, let us take a scenario that even after all of this, it has not worked, or a case has not been registered. What is the other remedy? So we will leave the FIR there, and let us look at the complaint case procedure. That suppose that you have a case which is only a non-cognizable case, but you still want it to be investigated and tried. So what do you do in such a scenario? Or despite all your efforts, your FIR has not been registered. So under 190 gives you the option where a complaint can be tried, investigated by the court itself. 191 states, and I'll read out, subject to the provisions of this chapter, any magistrate of the first class and any magistrate of the second class specially empowered in this behalf may take cognizance of any offense. A, we are concerned with A for now. 1A, upon receiving a complaint of facts which constitute such offense. So therefore, as a private complainant, you may make a written complaint, although just to pause here for a moment, the definition of complaint under CRPC states that the same can also be oral, it need not be in writing. Practically, that is not possible, and I have never seen that in all these years. So 1A, upon receiving a complaint of facts which constitute an offense, what does your complaint need to have? Your complaint needs to contain all the averments, and this is very, very crucial, because if it does not contain the necessary averments, your case thereafter can be quashed or thrown out either at the stage of the magistrate court itself, or in revision, or in quashing. So it definitely needs to make out specific averments and specific role of each of the accused whom you wish to prosecute. Further, your complaint needs to give a list of documents and witnesses that you will rely upon in support of your complaint. And once you have filed a complaint, then the magistrate takes cognizance, and we will understand the meaning of the word cognizance, because it's a very important judicial function. Magistrate will take cognizance and proceed to examine your witnesses and yourself as the complainant on oath. This is under section 200. So under section 200, the magistrate will examine you as a complainant and the witnesses, if any you have, and thereafter the magistrate will issue process, which is called issuing summons, and that order issuing process needs to be a very well reasoned order. Otherwise, it can be challenged at the time of in revision or before the High Court. What are the other things at the time of issuing before the process is issued? It is mandatory for the magistrate to conduct an inquiry under section 202 if the accused are outside the jurisdiction of the court taking cognizance. Why this provision? Because more often than not, when the police have refused to register an FIR, frivolous complaints may be filed only with the intent to harass the accused. So, suppose you're filing a case in Bombay and the accused are in Calcutta, and they are summoned. So a great deal of harm and harassment is caused to the accused. Therefore, this provision was made mandatory, wherein the accused are residing outside the jurisdiction of the court, that a magistrate conduct an inquiry. How is that inquiry conducted? The magistrate either may conduct the inquiry by himself, or the magistrate may direct the police that this is the complaint I have received. Kindly conduct an inquiry, kindly record statements of relevant witnesses, and give your opinion on whether any criminality is made out or not. So this provision under 202 is mandatory, and it's important because later on the process can be challenged if such an inquiry is not conducted. Another very important thing is that during this entire process, when you have filed a complaint and the magistrate examines you and your documents and your witnesses, the accused, even if he comes to know that such and such case is filed, cannot at that stage go before the court to say why the case should not proceed against him, why the process should not be issued, and that the complainant is misleading the court, and these are the entire set of documents, or this is the entire story, and therefore no case is made out. No. The accused absolutely has no say in this entire process. It is only between the complainant and the court, and you cannot at this stage interfere. It is only once the process is issued and you have received a summons that then you may challenge that before a higher court. You cannot even go back to the same magistrate or the same court and say, kindly recall your process because these are the true facts of the matter. You need to challenge that before the sessions court in a revision, or you may even challenge that before the High Court under section 482. So this is the case. This is how the complaint case procedure works. So after recording the after examining you and your witnesses, the magistrate may either decide that your case has substance and will issue process under section 204, or the magistrate may decide that it does not have any substance and dismiss the complaint. Right? So basically, these are the different ways that a prosecution can be launched. One is state case procedure, which we saw, and the second is complaint case procedure. Now, what happens? Now, let us go back to our FIR. What happens once the FIR is registered? Once the FIR is registered, there are many things that the investigating officer is required to do. The investigating officer, of course, is required to investigate, but before that, the investigating officer may want to arrest you. What does he do before that, or what is he required to do? Under section 41A of the CRPC, and I will read because it's slightly important, the police officer shall, and you'll see there's an asterisk next to shall, because this has been recently amended, and before this, the provision read as may. So now it is mandatory for the police officer. The police officer shall, in all cases where the arrest of a person is not required under provisions of subsection 1 of 41, issue a notice directing the person against whom a reasonable complaint has been made, or credible information has been received, or a reasonable suspicion exists that he has committed a cognizable offense, to appear before him or at such other place as may be specified in the notice. So this is of particular importance, and the Supreme Court has, in a plethora of judgments, starting with Arnesh Kumar, reiterated that it is imperative that the police officer issues a notice under 41A asking you to, this basically means that the notice will state, it is styled as a notice under section 41A, and it will state that such and such FIR has been registered against you under such and such sections, and you are required for investigation purposes in the case. Kindly appear before me on such and such date. This is what generally a section 41A notice reads in as far as Bombay is concerned, definitely. But I'm sure it remains the same with minor modifications elsewhere. The Supreme Court in Ajnesh Kumar stated, it laid down the guidelines of arrest, but most importantly, it stated that if the offense is punishable less than 7 years, the officer must give a notice under 41A. What happens when you receive the notice under 41A? This is your stage where you can do one of two things, or both the things. First is, you may, with consultation, decide that you should file an anticipatory bail application for your client. Why this is the stage? Because you may go to the police station in compliance with the notice under section 41A. However, it may very well happen that the police officer will decide to keep you there and not let you go back home and arrest you. So therefore, as soon as you receive a section 41A notice, on basis of that section 41A notice, you could file an application for anticipatory bail before the Sessions Court. Whether to file the anticipatory bail application or not is a question which needs to be deliberated, and carefully a decision needs to be taken, because if you are cooperating in the investigation and the officer is not wanting to arrest you, then you may hold your hand and not file that application, because in case your application is thereafter rejected, then the officer is definitely going to come to arrest your client. So therefore, you need to weigh the pros and cons of the case. You need to see whether you have a good case for an anticipatory bail application, and thereafter take a considered decision. This is also your stage to file for quashing under 482. Why I say this? Because quashing of an FIR is a far more acceptable remedy than once the charge sheet is filed and you go to the High Court saying, kindly quash the FIR as well as the charge sheet. Then the High Court is reluctant, because once the charge sheet is filed, you have another remedy before the magistrate or the trial court by way of a discharge application. And depending on the bench or the court's view, they may ask you that kindly avail of the remedy available to you by filing a discharge application, and do not come here. So therefore, once the FIR is registered, it is a stage that you decide whether or not you need to go for an anticipatory bail, and also whether you need to go for quashing. Of course, between the two, it is naturally most important that you secure bail first, because that concerns the liberty of your client, then go for quashing. Also, what happens is, sometimes if you get some observations in your quashing petition, then it may adversely affect your bail application. So this is the stage, and these are the remedies available to you, which you need to take after considering all these circumstances. Now, the FIR is registered, and you may or may not have availed of these remedies. What are the things that the police starts to do? The police is now obviously required to do investigation. What are the kinds of investigation that the police does? The police has to, suppose it's a case of murder, then the police needs to collect the post-mortem report, because that will give vital clues as to the cause of death, time of death, and so on and so forth, and it is required at the time of trial. In case of any other bodily injury, it needs to collect the medical evidence. If it is a case of, if it's an economic crime, the police will cause a forensic audit to be conducted and will collect all the documentary evidence. And additionally, the police will also record statements of witnesses who are material to the case. So there are two kinds of statements, and both of these are important. Section 161 of the CRPC. Any police officer making an investigation under this chapter, or any police officer not below such rank as the state government may, by general or special order prescribe, acting on the requisition, may examine orally any person supposed to be acquainted with the facts and circumstances of the case. So the officer may examine anybody, any person who knows anything about the case. This examination, the officer will generally reduce to writing and make it in a form of a statement. What is important here is that the statement is never signed by the witness. The statement is in the handwriting of the police officer, or nowadays is typewritten on the computer, and is signed only by the person who has recorded the statement, meaning the police officer, generally the IO, or any of his subordinates. Why it does not contain the signature of the witness is because there is always a likelihood that the police may force you to give a statement which you may or may not want to give, and therefore the CRPC does not make any provision of signed witness statements. What happens later on when we reach the stage of trial is that this statement is of some importance, because the witness, when he comes to the stand, needs to stand by his statement and needs to orally state before the court everything that is recorded in that purported statement of his under 161. If the witness does not conform to the statement, then the defense uses it as a contradiction, or even may declare the witness to be hostile, depending on how far away he has strayed from his original statement before the police. So this is 161 statements. That is how they are generally referred to by us. The second kind of statements are section 164 statements. These are statements which are recorded before a judicial officer, a magistrate, metropolitan judicial magistrate, who will record the statement. There are various safeguards the magistrate takes before they record the statement. They will there will be no presence of any police officer at the time of recording of the statement. It is only the magistrate and the person wishing to give the statement. The statement has to be voluntary. That question will be put to the witness if he is voluntarily making the statement. Only if the answer is in affirmative that the magistrate will record the statement. The value of this statement is much higher than a 161 statement because it is recorded before a magistrate. So therefore, even later on during the course of the trial, if the witness strays, the 164 statement can be read and used in evidence because it is recorded in front of a magistrate. At the highest, the magistrate will be called to the stand to prove the statement that it was recorded by him or her, and it was recorded as it is stated to be. So 164 statements are of much import. The officers are mandatorily required to record 164 statements in cases of, say, where there are sexual offenses against children, POCSO, or the police by themselves will record 164 statements in MCOC matters, organized crime matters, because there the likelihood of the witnesses turning hostile later on is very, very high, because when the underworld mafia is involved, it is more than often the witnesses are pressurized and they turn hostile when they come on the stand. So these are the two important statements which the police will record. And like I said, besides statements, it will collect all other evidence, and that may include CCTV evidence footage also, and depending on the case. So that is investigation and collection of evidence. Now what happens after all of this is done? The police file something called a charge sheet. Very important to note that charge sheet is not defined anywhere under the CRPC. All the CRPC talks about is a report under section 173 of the CRPC. So the police, after completing the entire investigation, will submit a report under section 173 before the concerned magistrate. Okay, what does the charge sheet contain? It will contain all the elements of the investigation, your FIR, your statements, CCTV footage, forensic material, documents, right? What will the IO, or what can the IO ask for once he has submitted the charge sheet or the report under 173? The IO may say that, yes, I have investigated the offense is made out, and therefore kindly summon the accused. Or the IO may also say that there is no case made out, and therefore kindly close the case, and what is generally known as the closure report. Why a closure report, right? Because we must understand you see, why does the state prosecute? The state prosecutes because the state intends to be independent over a private individual. So the crime is against society at large, though, there may be something which has been done personally against me. Something of mine has been stolen, or I have been injured. However, there should not be vengeance involved during the course of investigation or prosecution. Therefore, state takes over this entire responsibility, and it carries out, or supposed to carry out, an independent investigation. So therefore, the IO has to find the truth, and during the course of his investigation, after registration of FIR, he may find that actually no case is made out, and he may decide to file a closure report. Both of this, the charge sheet and or the closure report, are reports under section 173 of the CRPC. Closure report, let us see. What are the salient features? One, that it is an opinion of the IO which is material, because it is the IO is the investigating officer. It is the investigating officer who has actually conducted the entire investigation and has come to a conclusion. Closure report is of 3 types, and the CRPC does not define any of these 3 types. But if you look at the police manual, and every state has its own police manual. So as per the Bombay Police Manual, there are 3 kinds of closure reports. Generally, they're called C summary or B summary reports. C summary is when the IO comes to a conclusion that, yes, there is some case, but it is not a criminal case. At the highest, it is a civil dispute, and therefore the case needs to be closed. B summary is where the IO, after investigation, finds that there is no evidence to support the case. So that will be a B summary report. And A summary is where, despite all efforts, the accused cannot be found, or the IO is unable to come to a decision as to who has committed the crime. Then an A summary report can be filed. Another very important part at the time of filing of the closure report is that the court mandatorily needs to issue notice to the first informant or the victim. So you see, the code makes the victim is never left remedialess. There is some provision for him or at all times, and court needs to issue notice to the first informant stating that this is the report of the IO and he wants to close the case, and this is the material relied upon by him, and kindly come and file your say. And the complainant can then file something called a protest petition. Both these things are not, so to say, provided in the CRPC, but there's a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court in 1985 in Bhagwan Singh versus Commissioner of Police, wherein the court said it is mandatory because it is the victim who has been harmed, and therefore a hearing must be given to the victim before you actually close a case. What are the options before the magistrate? The magistrate may either accept the report of the IO and say, yes, I agree with the finding of the IO and the case needs to be closed. The magistrate may say, no, I find that enough investigation has not been carried out. Kindly do further investigation. He may even state that these are the aspects which I want you to investigate and send the case for further investigation. Or he may summon the accused, notwithstanding the finding of the IO, to close the case. For example, in the Talwar's case, the Talwar's case is an extreme example, but I will tell you that in that case, though a closure report was filed, even the IO of the case, when he was in court, did not support his own finding and sought that the accused be summoned. And even the magistrate did not go by the finding of the IO on the report and summoned both the accused. So this is how a closure report and the options before the magistrate if a closure report is sought to be filed. Now let's come to few important features of a charge sheet. I'm sorry, the title says closure report, but one of the things which is commonly asked is what is the time limit to file a charge sheet? Because the police are not filing a charge sheet, there must be a time, 60 days, 90 days. The code does not provide any time limit for completion of investigation. The courts have time and again reiterated that we will not interfere in a police investigation. That is not our prerogative. The police may take its time to investigate a matter. So there is no time limit specified for completion of investigation, except now there is an amendment that in cases involving sexual offenses against minors, there is a time limit of 3 months, right? Like I told you already, the charge sheet is a complete report. It contains the FIR, the names of the accused, whether the accused are arrested, when they are arrested, are they granted bail, and the names of the witnesses that it wants to examine, the statements of such witnesses, any other documentary forensic evidence that they intend to rely upon. Thirdly, the IO may say that, yes, I have completed investigation with respect to accused number 1, 2, and 3, and I am filing charge sheet against them. However, I still need to conduct investigation against the other accused, and therefore, I will do further investigation under section 173(8). This is a power given to the IO, and no particular permission needs to be sought. However, in the first charge sheet that the IO will file before the court, it will state investigation pending and further investigation is being done. There is a column, and under that column, it will clearly state whether investigation completed or investigation ongoing, right? Then you would say that there's no time limit given to the officer and the officer may delay. Yes, that's true. But there are, of course, certain penalties that if you don't complete a charge sheet within a certain time, then there are certain penalties against the officer or some relief given to the accused, and we will come to that in a moment. Now, another very important part is in the USA, you have something called fair disclosure, wherein any material that the police may come across, whether or not it is beneficial to their case, that material has to be disclosed mandatorily. Such a concept is non-existent in India. In India, the police will rely upon only those documents that it wishes to rely upon. And of course, that will mean that it will leave out material, any material that may be beneficial to the accused at the time of filing the charge sheet. There is a recommendation of the Law Commission to change this, but as on date, it is not obliged to place any material that is going against his case. There are two shining judgments, and both I have mentioned here. One is of Siddharth Vashisht, commonly the Manu Sharma's case, wherein the Supreme Court finally stated that, okay, if the police has collected some material which is beneficial to you, and you are aware of the same, then you may approach the court seeking that the police produce that material also before the court. So some relief there, but otherwise the law is that only that material which the police picks and chooses, they may rely upon only that material. Right? So these are some important features with respect to a charge sheet or a report under 173. Now coming to the most or more talked about is the arrest. So we saw FIR was registered, we saw 41A notices given, we saw that you may approach the courts either for an anticipatory bail, you may go for quashing. What if none of those things have happened for one reason or the other and the client is arrested? So of course, an investigation can definitely start with arrest, and at the time of making arrest, the police officer, what happens when the arrest is carried out? At the time of making arrest, there are certain guidelines given in section 41B. I'll list those out briefly. One, that the officer needs to display his name, his designation, his number, so and so, that needs to be displayed clearly while carrying out the arrest. Second, an arrest memo is what is to be filled. The arrest memo needs to have two witnesses, one of which should be a relative or a friend if possible, and the arrest memo needs to be countersigned by the accused who is arrested. Thirdly, the accused must be informed that he has the right to inform either his friend or relative if that friend or relative is not there at the time of making the arrest. Other than this, please do read the Sterling judgment in case of DK Basu, which lays out in detail the guidelines that need to be strictly followed by the police while carrying out arrest. In fact, if you go to any police station, you will find that at every police station, all of those guidelines have been put up in compliance with that judgment outside of the police station. So that is a very important judgment. I'm sorry it's not here, but DK Basu. Now, what happens after arrest? After arrest, two things. One, that the police are very funnily required to complete the investigation within 24 hours. And second, that if you are unable to complete that investigation within 24 hours, then you are required to produce that accused before a magistrate. This is section 57. So, of course, the investigation cannot be completed within 24 hours, and the police produce the accused to the nearest magistrate within 24 hours of the arrest. After the accused is produced before the magistrate, the accused will seek remand. What does that mean? The police will seek remand. What does that mean? It just means that the further detention of the accused be authorized by the magistrate. Now, this remand can be of two types. One is police custody remand, PCR, or judicial custody remand. So, this is slightly technical, but very, very important. In a police custody remand, the accused is given in the custody of the police, and the accused is in the lockup of the police station, and the police have all the access to the accused, and the police can interrogate the accused. That is the whole purpose of police custody remand, right? So that is one. Second, judicial custody is when the magistrate sends him to jail. So, for example, the Arthur Road prison. So, Arthur Road prison is under the magistrate, and the accused is under the custody of the magistrate, and the police has no access to the accused during this time. So, the police will definitely seek police custody remand, and the magistrate is free to decide whether or not to grant police custody or judicial custody. Now, what are the rules with regard to police custody? One, the magistrate will not grant all of police custody at the same time. Generally, how it happens is that the accused is produced before the magistrate, and the magistrate will say, all right, you get police custody for 2 days. After 2 days, the police is supposed to come back and show the magistrate that during these 2 days, This is the information we have elicited from the accused, and it has helped further our investigation. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are 5 reasons why we need further police custody in order to unearth the truth. Okay, the magistrate will, depending on the reports, the police diary, decide whether actually there has been any progress in the investigation. And if it feels yes, there has been some progress in the investigation, he will grant further police custody. This police custody cannot be more than a total of 15 days from the date of arrest. So for a period of 15 days, the accused can be given to the police from time to time, looking at the progress in investigation. After 15 days, necessarily the accused has to be sent to judicial custody. Yes, here I have given one judgment, CBI versus Anupam Kulkarni, which sets the law that there cannot be more than 15 days of custody with the police. However, this is interchangeable, meaning to say that the police may take the accused for police custody for 10 days and then tell the magistrate that as of now, we are done. We don't need his custody anymore. Please send him to jail. If there is some more material which comes later and we need to confront him with that material, we will again come back to you and seek our remaining 5 days of police custody. This is possible. Does it happen often? No, it does not happen. It happens only when the offenses are really very large and there are several accused, and the investigating agency uses its police custody very sparingly, and at times it is important. For example, in this Sheena Bora's murder case, the CBI, after 10 days of police custody of Peter Mukherjee, sought to send him to jail. However, as a strategy, we argued that no, kindly complete his entire police custody. Let the CBI investigate as much as they want, because there is nothing further to be investigated, and complete the whole period of 15 days. So it depends, but cumulatively, it cannot be more than 15 days. Also, another point why it's necessary that the police custody is over is because the bail application of the accused cannot be heard unless and until the police custody is over. And there is some reasoning to this. Why is that? Is because police custody is a period of investigation and interrogation. So a lot of material may come up against the accused during this period, right? So if a bail application is heard prior to the police investigation being over or the police custody being over, then it may be premature, and therefore, though the court does not make any provision for this, the practice is that the application of bail can be heard only after the period of police custody is over. Can you file the application before? Yes, it's a discretion of the magistrate, and you really need to press to the same. Why that is important is because from police custody, if your client goes to jail, it's a very troubling process. So if you file your application earlier, and there's a say of the PP and there is a reply of the IO which is required, and all of that process you can complete in this period of 15 days. So the day the 15th day of the police custody is over, your application is actually ready with all the replies and so on and so forth to be heard, and the order actually can be passed on that day. So this is what a remand entails, and this is before a magistrate court necessarily. So it does not matter how serious the offense is. The remand is always before the magistrate court, and the magistrate in fact plays some of the very important functions in a criminal case, one of which being remand. Of course, for special acts where the cognizance itself is by the special judge. And I'll give you 2-3 examples. For example, offenses under the Companies Act, it is to be tried by a special judge. A special judge is neither a magistrate nor a sessions court judge, and there's a constitution bench judgment on that. But let us restrict ourselves today. So a special judge is a sessions judge who sits in sessions court. So Companies Act, prosecution under the SEBI Act, prosecution under NDPS, all of these are before the special judge. So remand in these cases will come before the special judge, but otherwise in all other cases, even in the case of murder under IPC, the remand will be heard by the magistrate only. So this is one important function, and I'll tell you a couple more as we progress. So this was with respect to remand. Now, what about investigation after arrest? We saw that there is no time limit to complete the investigation, but I told you there are some penalties. So what happens that the accused is arrested. Once the accused is arrested, then if the IO does not complete the investigation either within 60 days or within 90 days. 60 days if the offense is punishable by less than 10 years, 90 days anything punishable by more than 10 years, including life and death. If the IO does not complete this in this period, then the accused is entitled to default bail. And this is a right which has no restrictions, no fetters. From the day of arrest, from the day the accused is produced before the magistrate in a remand, from that day, if the charge sheet is not filed within 60 or 90 days, then the accused has to get bail. So this is a automatic, or what we call default bail. So now also the interesting part about the supplementary charge sheet. So what will the IO do? He cannot afford that the accused be released. So he will file a charge sheet and then say, my investigation is still pending. I will file a supplementary charge sheet. So he uses the provision available to him under 173(8), where he need not necessarily complete the investigation and he may continue to investigate the matter. Or what happens is that he may complete the investigation, like I said, against this accused which has been arrested. However, he may continue the investigation with regard to the other accused who may be absconding, who may not have been found, etc. Right? Once the charge sheet is filed, is where you can file discharge. We'll just look at that. Now, once the charge sheet is filed, where is it to be filed? Second very important function, which is done only by the magistrate and no other court can do this function, which is of taking cognizance. What is taking cognizance? It's the single most important judicial function that is done by the magistrate, wherein the magistrate looks at the charge sheet before him and takes judicial notice of the crime, and that is what is called taking cognizance. And there are several judgments and you must read on this aspect of taking cognizance. So a charge sheet is filed and the magistrate will take cognizance under 191B. If you remember, and I quickly go back to this slide, where complaint case 191A we saw is where you file a private complaint. Now see 191B, it says the magistrate may take cognizance upon a police report of such facts. This charge sheet is that police report, right? So coming back to this, then once the charge sheet is filed, the magistrate will take cognizance, and after taking cognizance, the magistrate will summon the accused, and once the accused have appeared, the magistrate does function under section 207. Section 207 states that the accused is to be supplied with everything that is filed before the court, that is the charge sheet, free of cost, without any delay, once the accused has appeared before the court. So magistrate will summon the accused under 204 and after appearance ensure that he complies with the provisions of 207 and make sure that accused is given all the documents filed by the IO free of cost. After he has complied with section 207, now let's take an example, a case under 302. which is of murder. This case is triable only by the Sessions Court. However, all of these things have happened before the magistrate. So therefore, now what does he do? The magistrate looks at the charge sheet and sees that the case is not triable by him. So he will pass something called a committal order, which is under section 209, wherein he basically commits the case to the Court of Session. He says, I have gone through this and come to the conclusion that the said case is not triable by me. I have complied with the provision under 207 or 208 and supplied all the documents to the accused. And now I commit the case to Court of Sessions for purposes of trying the case, right? So these are some very important functions which are done by the magistrate. One we spoke about was of remand, and the other is of taking cognizance and of committal. Finally, trial. After all of this has happened, the case now is ripe for trial. Some of the fundamentals of trial, I'm sure most of you know that there's a presumption of innocence. Burden of proof is always on the state, except a few cases like abetment of suicide, where the Evidence Act under 114A, there's a reverse presumption. Right to remain silent shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. Okay, he may voluntarily decide to give a confession. That is different, but otherwise he cannot be forced, compelled to be a witness. And a person cannot be tried and convicted for the same offense twice. So these are some of the basic principles of last. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it's an hour already. Trial under CRPC, there are three kinds of trials: summons trial, warrant trial. Both of these are triable by the magistrate. And second is the sessions trial, which are cases which are tried by the Sessions Court. 6 stages. As soon as the charge sheet is filed, and I discussed this briefly before, you may file an application for discharge, stating that if you go by the charge sheet as it is, without adding or subtracting anything, still there is no case made out against me, and therefore I am entitled to be discharged. So court needs to consider that. If your discharge application is rejected, the court will proceed to framing of the charge, and there are arguments at this stage wherein you may argue as to what charge can be framed. Third, once the charge is framed, it is then the trial commences. Before this, it is only a stage of cognizance, and the trial only commences after framing of charge. Common Cause versus Union of India, the Supreme Court has clarified this position. Third is recording of evidence. The witnesses, all whose statements have been recorded by the police, they'll all be summoned. If they do not come on their own after issuing a summons, a warrant can be issued against them. Necessarily, they have to come, give evidence. Once the recording of evidence is over, there's something called a statement under 313, again of much importance, because herein the court puts questions to the accused, stating that it has come in the evidence against you that you on so and so date were seen at XYZ place. What do you have to say about it? This statement is not on oath. The accused is free to say that I don't know, this is untrue, this is false. But if the accused wants, the accused can explain the circumstances which have come against him. This is his chance. So this statement is of very much importance, because this is the stage where the accused actually gets an opportunity to explain the circumstances which have come against him. Thereafter, if any defense evidence has to be led, in trials, unless and until your victim is sure and good, generally the defense will avoid putting him up on the stand, because anything he says which is can be an admission, and then that can be a very strong blow to your case. Finally, arguments by the both sides, written arguments also, and judgment. So that is how trial, in short, that is what is that those are the stages for a trial. So in this way, friends, we have the journey from investigation to trial and the various steps involved in this journey. I have tried to explain to you. I hope things were clear. If not, whatever questions you may have, I will take now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushal sir. Thank you so much. You gave us the excellent update related to the subject. We are grateful to you for the wonderful presentation on this provision of law. Thank you, sir.
Most welcome.